How's everybody doing? All right. So, what is food? It nourishes us, it satisfies hunger, and it's essential for survival. But like art, music, movies, and books, food tells a story that we can pass on to generations. It is one of the oldest forms of communication and connection, and it's extremely powerful. It defines us. It tells us who we are. It tells us where we're from. It's part of our identity. How many of you guys in the audience have that one relative that brings that one dish to the Thanksgiving table? And if that dish wasn't there, something would be missing. It wouldn't be the same. Now, how many of you know how to make that dish? Like really make it? Like have made it with that person? See, that's the disconnect. And this is one thing that really scares me, is that, you know, we're losing our family's stories through food. I feel it's our obligation. It's a powerful responsibility that we have. Now, I grew up about 3 hours east of a small town called Abbeville, Louisiana. And this is Cajun country, like really Cajun country. This is where the old-timers are found in the back smoky bars, speaking French, and playing a game called bourrée, which is Cajun poker. And the Cajuns, they came down from Nova Scotia. They settled in South Louisiana. Very difficult area to settle in, you know, but they survived. They survived by living off the land, hunting, fishing, and trapping. They're resilient people, passionate about their heritage. And, you know, they continue to thrive. Not only survive, but thrive today. And they have such a strong work ethic, a work ethic that I think that was passed down to me through my Aunt Boo. Now, Aunt Boo goes by many titles. She's the godmother of at least a dozen kids that I know of. She's my godmother. She's Aunt Jan. She's Janice Bourgeois. And like the title of her first cookbook, she's the high priestess of the bayou. Now, growing up in New Orleans, when my parents had enough and were kind of at their rope's end with me, they'd send me to Abbeville to kind of get my head on straight and have Aunt Boo straighten me out. And I knew that going there, I'd have this laundry list of chores. But the other thing that I knew that I could always count on walking into the kitchen at Aunt Boo's house in Abbeville was that I'd have at least 2 pounds of hot steaming boudin wrapped in white butcher paper with a pack of saltine crackers waiting for me in the kitchen. And boudin is a Cajun pork sausage that's filled with rice and spices. And while eating this boudin, and truly that was my welcoming card. This is when I knew that I was in Abbeville. I had to have it, and she knew that. And we'd get it from this one place called Richard's. And, you know, I'd be sitting there eating the boudin and snacking on the crackers, and she'd always be busy in the kitchen. And, you know, I'm talking about like duck carcasses everywhere from local hunters, you know, fish scales all over the sink. And, but she'd always have something on the stove, always. And she was always in her apron. And the joke is, we think that she sleeps in her apron because she's gone to the grocery store in her apron. She's accidentally gone out to restaurants to meet me for lunch in her apron. And she's got a big old pocket in like kind of the center of the apron. And it's always got some, you know, really crass sort of vulgar saying on the apron. But she'd always tuck a koozie in her apron as well, because you never know when you're going to need a koozie. And Aunt Boo was the master of stirring and cooking with one hand, because like most Louisianians in Louisiana, you know, you learn to cook with one hand because you reserve that other hand for a nice cold beer. And, you know, I would ask the questions that my younger cousins wouldn't, because they didn't care about what she was doing. They were just hungry. But for me, as I got older, I would start asking her questions about what she was doing in the kitchen. And I guess I was asking the right questions because she started paying attention to me. She invited me into her kitchen, and she started answering me. And years later, I remember her saying to me, David, if you really, really want to learn where you come from and the sort of the history of Louisiana, and you want to learn about Louisiana cuisine, you have to learn the very first thing, which is how to make a roux. A roux? What's a roux? Well, Roux is the name of my yellow lab. It's also the vanity plates on my Harley. But the roux that she was referring to that day was two simple ingredients that everybody here has in their pantry. Fat and flour, oil and flour, equal parts. But combined and cooked to the right color, roux is the heartbeat of Louisiana cuisine. I can tell you, I remember stirring the roux and, typical impatient teenager. And, I was like, well, when is it going to be ready? When is it going to be ready? Because if you don't know, roux takes a very long time. And you can't be an impatient teenager stirring roux. So I practiced, and it forced me to sort of focus and stand still. But I remember her telling me that you'll know when it's ready when the color of the roux is like the bayou after a heavy rain. And, I immediately identified with that. And that's the kind of cook Aunt Boo was. She made it real. Bringing in the local environment or whatever. And she was just very grounded like that. She always talked just you immediately associated with what she was talking about. I continued to lean on her over the years, asking her for advice. And I remember trying to make a decision about whether or not I wanted to go to culinary school. And she gave me some wonderful advice. I can't tell you what that is right now because I don't remember, but it was sound advice. But, to this day, whether I ask her or not, she continues to give me her 2 cents about my Louisiana cooking. But, she's the one that bought me my first cast iron pot. She's the one that taught me the importance of using a wooden spoon versus a metal spoon. So in Louisiana, there is a saying, and it's actually the title of a cookbook, but, we say, who's your mama? Is she Catholic? And can she make a roux? And that kind of sums up roux for Louisianians and for me. But fast forward, August 29th, 2005. Katrina slams into the Gulf Coast. The city of New Orleans is completely underwater. My parents, they lose everything. They evacuate to Houston, and it wasn't for months later that they decided not to move back to New Orleans and rebuild. Even though I'd been living in D.C. now at this time for 7 years, I really, really struggled with their decision. Very selfish of me, but I struggled with it. Because for me, home is always where your mom and dad are. And the fact that they were uprooted, I really started to question my identity in my childhood and everything about growing up in that incredible city. So I started frantically writing things down that I remember about growing up in New Orleans. And I did it really for my boys. I wanted to document things before I couldn't remember them anymore. And after writing down all this kind of frantically over months and months, I realized I had pretty much written my first cookbook. Because every single thing that I remember about the city of New Orleans growing up there had a food connection. Every single thing. And one connected to the other. So, published my first cookbook, started to work on the concept for my first restaurant. And again, the restaurant had to be all about Louisiana. I wanted to walk into work every day and be reminded of home, just the same way that I walked in her kitchen and saw that boudin. It told me everything was going to be okay. It was an instant welcoming card. And still, after 8 years in the restaurant, I can see Louisianians and other Southern folk come in the restaurant, and they're immediately looking for things to latch onto. So they're looking through the menu, they're trying to find, they're skimming, and they're flipping it over. They're digging, they're looking for a dish that they recognize. They're looking at the decor of the restaurant, and you can kind of all of a sudden see this sort of sigh of relief that they're in the right place. And that's important to me, because that's how we identify ourselves and grounds us in our identity through food, those familiar smells. You don't have to be a professional chef to connect in the kitchen. to tell stories in the kitchen. You don't have to be a restaurant owner. It's not one of those things. That's important. But remembering that one dish not making it to the table, this is where the real call of action is, because we have an obligation for the next generation to continue to tell our family stories through this food, through our cuisine. So if you haven't, if you're one of those that doesn't know how to make that dish, because that family member is not always going to be at the table, it's important that you connect. You reach out now and try to connect with them. Try to make that dish start to finish. Because just like Aunt Boo, those stories just started to flow when I was in the kitchen with her. And I learned a lot about myself, my family, and who I was and where I came from, all over a pot of roux. So I invite you to go out there and buy your first cast iron pan and grab that wooden spoon and start stirring the roux. Thank you.